So I guess we'll start with when we were living in Billings. No? When did you know Bill?
We didn't meet her until Mississippi.
Okay. Oh, yes, right. So in Mississippi, we met a friend of ours now who had lived in Europe, and she influenced us, and so we decided that we'd go and stay for a while. So it wasn't very long before I applied for a job with an English geophysical company, and they accepted me. And I had to pay our way over, but when we got there, we were reimbursed, so it didn't cost us that much. That was in England. I don't think I gave the family much of choice. I was just ready to go.
I think we wanted a little better life than what we thought we were having in the States. And we really wanted to see how the rest of the world lived. And you couldn't do it as a tourist. We could have gone and just made a trip and come back, but we didn't feel like we would get the feeling and really understand. And so that was the purpose of going in the first place.
I agree.
Of course, once we got there, then it became a problem of how do we get back home again, because we really didn't have the income. His income was cut by 2/3 in order for us to go there. And so and living expenses were not cheap. The first place that we lived in France, well, we were in England first. We'll go back to that. But the first place that we lived in France was on Rue Colette, which was a darling little 3-room apartment that had a wonderful balcony that overlooked the market street below. Loved to watch the beer trucks come at the wine place on the corner, and they'd block the road, so the traffic had to absolutely stop until the beer trucks were unloaded. We saw many an argument about move the beer truck, and they'd argue for a little while, and then finally the driver of the car and the beer truck driver would go arm in arm into the pub and go have a beer together, I assume, or a glass of wine or something. But anyway, we loved living in this little apartment. It had wonderful rainbows,
Sunset here.
wonderful rooftops. And there was a coffee shop just down below us that roasted coffee, and you opened the windows in the morning and here was this marvelous aroma of coffee being brewed or being roasted. Loved that. It had a little tinky dinky kitchen that was big enough for one person. It had a 2-burner little gas stove, and we managed to cook on that little stove. We did pretty well with our meals on that stove too. They said it had a wonderful balcony. We were surprised that the balcony didn't tilt heavily toward the street because we spent so much time on it that we could very easily have ruined the...
Now I would say that I was off quite frequently working someplace, so Honey knows more about the places than I do. That's why I'm not saying too much. She had to live there. I was often gone someplace.
Unfortunately, we only had a month-to-month lease on that apartment, and I don't remember the circumstances exactly, but we had to leave, which meant that we had to go apartment hunting again. And with our total lack of French language, it wasn't an easy task, but we did find an apartment on Rue Vauvenargues, and it was, again, just a 3-room apartment. No, it had a kitchen, a living room, and 2 bedrooms.
Big rooms, though.
But they were all very big. They were beautifully furnished with Louis XV furniture. It was on the 3rd floor. They called it the 12e étage, but it was actually the way we counted to be on the 3rd floor. And it was mostly the furniture that I started teaching the children actually when we were on Rue Colette, because we could not get them into the French school. They didn't have any French to get into the French school. We couldn't get them into the American school, and so I had to teach them at home, which was a wonderful learning experience for me. Not only did I learn some things that I didn't know, because I had to be prepared with the studies for the kids the next day, but it was learning my children too, which most parents do not know their own children, and I feel like I really learned my children. I learned their learning ability, their personalities, and I just so much that most parents don't. Anyway, it was a wonderful experience.
The balcony.
There were balconies. There are always balconies in Paris. And we spent a lot of time on a balcony at Rue Vaugrenard too. The building was sort of in a V shape. And the balcony was our balcony was on one side, and there was another balcony over here that belonged to the other apartment that was on the same floor we were on. And I used to stand on that balcony and talk to the neighbor that was over there. She didn't speak any English and I didn't speak any French, but we held long conversations. We got very well acquainted with mostly sign language. I don't know what we'd have done without sign language. As I said, we had all Louis XV furniture, Louis XIV, 15th.
C'est pas.
Whatever I said originally, that's what it was. And in the bedroom there was a fur rug that you couldn't vacuum, you couldn't sweep. It was way too big and too heavy to shake. It just shed all the time. So all you could do was just kind of sweep the white fur away. I have no idea what kind of fur it was, but it was a huge white fur rug. It was probably polar bear or something. It was huge.
Oh, the opera, that's more my category. Although you went alone a couple times. The Paris Opera is a very unique building, and we enjoyed going there very much. And we always, I believe, had a box. Did we not?
I think so.
And it had a room for dressing, taking your coats off, and then the box was out in front of that. And we went to several operas there. Faust. Yeah. Aida. Don't remember, but several times. And then once when I was down in the desert, they sneaked off to the Opera Comique and saw Pearl Fishers. Yeah.
Now, we're not finished with this one yet.
Yeah.
Because this is, when we arrived in France, the buildings were all blue-gray in color. And we remember our Paris is blue-gray. But after the wars were all over with, and they finished the war in Algeria, they had no more money that had to go toward war materials, and so they decided that everybody had to clean their buildings, and so all the buildings had to be sandblasted. And we found out then that the buildings were sort of a creamy, sandy color, with beautiful black iron railings, and all the ironwork on the buildings just suddenly stood out that we'd never seen before. That was really beautiful. But we still remember Paris as being blue-gray.
Okay, yeah, that one's mine. I worked on the Rue Chaussée d'Antin. I had my office there for a while, didn't always stay there. It was in an apartment in the same building where Napoleon's Josephine had an apartment when they were getting acquainted. Across the street from there was one of the big department stores called Galerie Lafayette. And I could come out my door and just go across the street and go in the door there. And I was right in the stamp department, so I spent all my noon hours rummaging through the stamps. I think that's...
The most important thing that he leaves out about Chaussée d'Antin is when you left the Gare Saint-Lazare station, walking over to where his office was, you walked through the hottest red light district of Paris.
Yeah, that's right.
And the girls were all lined up along the street, and they were beautiful girls. I don't know how he resisted them, quite honestly. But he found out that after the first couple of days that he was a regular, and then they stopped bothering him.
Yeah.
But they were beautiful girls, young, voluptuous girls.
I didn't stay in that office very long. We had another one. Oh, where in the world was this one? I forget. Anyway, it was a very peculiar building in that the ground floor we used as a garage and did our truck repairs there. And then as you progressed upward floor by floor, the whole area was encircled by offices. And I had my own. There were plenty for everybody. The company wasn't that large. Oh, the company was Compagnie Française de Prospection Sismique. How you like that? I remember how to say it. That's, yeah, French seismic company is all it means. And I got secretary there was Mademoiselle Fougere, and she helped a lot, and she spoke English very well, and we got acquainted enough so we could call ourselves friends. And we, after we had a car, we took her around where we would go. We'd take her along too sometimes.
And she came to
She
visit
came
us
to
when we
England.
were in England.
Yeah.
Yes. It's the first time she had been to England, first time she had seen snow the way we had it there.
We made a good joke to her. When there's work going on the roads in France, they call it a work area, chantier. But when we first got there and our French wasn't so good to look at it, it said chantier. So we got saying, when it said fin de chantier, meaning the end of the work area, we said, no more singing, which is chantier, not chantier. And we pulled that joke once with Mademoiselle Fougere with us, and she finally got the point and thought it was extremely funny. We had a lot of parties. That was the common thing. The least little thing is celebrated in France. And particular one was St. Catherine's Day, when all the single women, what can you say, they paraded down the street anyway.
And they pursued men.
Yeah, the sex cases, what? Anyway, things were reversed.
It was a Sadie Hawkins Day of France.
Well, you got to know Little
And
Abner.
if
to
you know
what that-
Little Abner, you'll know what Sadie Hawkins Day is, where the women go absolutely bananas. They lose their timidity. There, got the right word.
Anyway, we
fun.
frequently were at the closest cafe bar celebrating something or celebrating nothing.
And so much so that they called it Annex Number 1.
Oh, yeah, I forgot that. That was the closest bar, and Annex Number 2 was the closest good bar.
Right. Now, we lived on Rue Vauvenargues that was not exactly parallel to Saint Ouen, but
Nothing is parallel.
nothing is parallel in Paris. But on Saint Ouen, they had it was one of the few places in Paris that had a regular street market that was open every day. I did all my shopping there. There were shops in the buildings around that were permanent, but there were carts on the street, just at the edge of the sidewalk, for about 3 blocks on both sides of the street. And it was a wonderful market. You always had to take your own carrying. I carried a basket, and you buy 3 oranges, and they're put in your basket. If you bought a kilo of green beans, they put it into a piece of folded newspaper, so it made sort of a little cup out of the folded newspaper. And then you put that into your basket. But they didn't provide any bags for groceries or anything at that time. But the food, everything was always absolutely fresh. And I shopped at the market every single day.
They had you.
Yeah. For breakfast, we got in the habit of always having fresh baked goods, and the children would go down to the boulangerie, and they would order, for Ross and for me, they would order 2 pommes chaussons, they're sort of an apple turnover, and 2 croissants. And Paul always had 2, they just called them chocolat, but they were chocolate inside of a croissant. And they tell me this is very good. I never acquired a taste for chocolate and bread, but Paul always had 2 of those. Linda always had a pomme chausson and a croissant. No, and a chocolate. We also went to the bakery 3 times a day to buy fresh bread. You just never used old stale bread. You took it and fed it to the pigeons or something, but you always bought, if you only needed a half a loaf of bread or a third of a loaf of bread, that's all you bought. But you bought it 3 times a day. And usually, if you went the wrong time of the bakery, they didn't have any bread anyhow because they only baked exactly the amount that they knew they would sell that day. When we weren't eating at home, we did eat at the sidewalk cafes, and the sidewalk cafes in France were used, not unlike the ones that we have even here in Florida. We have a lot of outdoor restaurants, but you seldom ever see people really in them unless the restaurants are totally full.
Yeah.
But in France, they're used all the time, and we ate at them frequently. It was usually just a sandwich and a Coke or something, but then when we wanted to go on a picnic now, this was another whole ball of wax. We would stop at the bakery and we would buy a baguette, and we would stop at the
Boucherie.
Charcuterie. And there we would buy exactly the amount of ham that we needed to make sandwiches and mustard, usually a tube of mustard. And we would take that and buy a bottle of soda of some kind, take it to the park, make ourselves ham sandwiches and sit on a bench and eat our sandwiches. We had no waste paper, nothing to contend with. And the bottle that the soda came in, we ended up taking back because they were always returned for refills. But that was a picnic, and that's still our favorite way to go on a picnic. The last time we were in Paris, we still went to our favorite restaurant on Rue Saint-Ouen and ate at the Sidewalk Cafe. And again, it was a jambon sandwich. While Ross was gone, there was many times when we didn't have anything to do and didn't really have any money to go anyplace in the middle of the week, what to do. And so the kids and I would go down to the Seine, and we would sit on the banks of the river, and we would watch the garbage flow by. That may not sound very entertaining, but you really have to see the garbage that went down the Seine to realize that we saw everything float down. And I do mean we saw everything float down that river. But it was very relaxing, even though it was just the garbage. But it was nice, sunny, bright there.
Oh, yeah.
We lived just down the hill from Sacré-Cœur, which is a white church that's up on a hill
That's Sacred Heart.
that anybody who's been or has seen pictures of Paris have seen the white church that's up on a hill. And from the view up there over Paris was gave you definitely the opinion that there was a building limit of 100 meters, and there were no buildings in the city that were taller than that except the monuments. And the monuments then, of course, stood up like what? Like ships in the night, just scattered around the landscape. It isn't like that anymore. They allowed tall buildings to come in, and it's ruined the skyline. In Rue Vauvenargues, we had one of our best Christmases. We decided we were going to give the kids absolutely everything that they wanted one Christmas. So absolutely everything they asked for, we got them. I mean, they didn't get diamond watches. Linda got a watch, but it wasn't a diamond watch. But anyway, so we had a wonderful big Christmas that particular year, and so that we wouldn't have excess baggage, we had a portable Christmas tree. It had little branches that you just stick into a stick, and it was white. It wasn't really terribly attractive.
I don't remember what we got them, but we got them a whole bunch of stuff.
I seem to remember that there were pajamas and robes and things like that, aside from the toys and
Oh, did I get the first train there for Paul?
that's possible.
Yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, our Christmas tree was a portable, probably 4 feet tall, if that.
2.
2 feet. Okay, it wasn't
Maybe
very
3.
big. But it had little stems that stuck into a center post, and then we use a garland to kind of wrap around it. Well, we did different things different years to make this tree attractive. But we always used candy tied up as the ornaments on the tree so that when Christmas was over with, we used the garland for packing and we ate the candy. So we didn't have anything more additional to pack.
And when we lived in Nice, we ran into something that was rather unusual. They were called the Ville Perchée, literally a perched town, and they were all built on the top of a hill, usually near the seacoast, and sometimes it took a drawbridge to get to them. Anyway, the reason for these was that, who were the pirates? Barbary Coast? Yeah, I think so. Pirates from the Barbary Coast would steal anything they could get their hands on. Well, they couldn't get up these hills, and so the villagers were safe. They were nearly all abandoned, and those that weren't were tourist traps. We've still got some things we bought in one of them.
We still refer to some of these areas as old abandoned gun emplacements. We don't have pictures to show of a gun emplacement. There were some that were scattered around the hills, but they certainly weren't picturesque. But every time we saw something that was a ruin, we sort of jokingly referred to as an old abandoned gun emplacement. And for a while, I say we were calling them old abandoned Cadillac factories, but nobody seems to remember that but me.
No. You sure you didn't make that up?
I must have made it up. Yeah, I guess so.
Oh, another thing down on the Mediterranean coast, Nice is one of my favorite towns. That and Rio. I don't think there's any other better place, is there?
Not as far as I'm concerned. I think we could very easily have retired there if we could have kept the family all together and stayed in Nice, because we really did love it there. Aside from the climate being maybe a little cooler than what it is in Florida, but not a whole lot. It was sunny and pleasant, and of course the kids and I were there alone all the time. Ross was in the Sahara, and so of course he enjoyed it. He only came about every 3 weeks. He'd fly across and spend a weekend, and so we always did fun things every time he came. And there were so many fun things to do along the Riviera. And of course, we were lucky enough to be there during Carnival.
Mardi Gras in New Orleans.
And it is the wildest possible time of the year. They have a parade, and when they have a parade, they don't have one that starts at the beginning, goes through, and that's the end. Not in France. In France, they have a parade that starts at the beginning and it goes to the end, and it turns around and goes back again. And then it'll turn around and go back again. And it keeps going back and forth until everybody gets so tired, I guess. There is no end to a parade. And during the normal parades, they have confetti. Now, it's not just a little bag of confetti like this. It's a shopping bag full of confetti. And you take not just a little handful, you take handfuls of it and you throw it at people. And you throw it as you're walking past them, and you go like this and you shove it into their mouth. We ate lots of confetti, but there were no hard feelings. This was always expected. It was great fun. When the parade, the first day was over, the confetti was ankle deep for about 6 blocks down the main drag in Nice.
Yeah.
Now, not only did they have, during Carnival, do they have just the regular big stuffed paper mache head type people in the parade, but there are different kinds of parades. At Menton, the whole park and the parade there was decorated with citrus fruit. Sometimes it was just great sprays of things, and sometimes, huge big floats that were 3 and 4 stories high, very fragile looking things. You wonder how the structure could support the weight of the fruit.
In the park, there were a lot of displays, and they were done by the school children as a contest.
I don't even remember what this one is.
That's just the parade at night.
Oh,
They had,
lights.
they had the Mardi Gras parade during the day, but they had it at night too, one day of the week. And this is the Bataille des Fleurs.
Then toward the end of Carnival, they had the Battle of Flowers, and again, the parade was made up, and all the mostly horse-drawn carts
Yeah.
were covered with flowers, and the people riding in them would throw flowers to the people that were along the parade route. And of course, again, you could buy a bag full of roses, rose petals or rose flowers or any kind of flowers, and you throw flowers back to the people that were in the parade.
Well, I'm sure that's where the Rosewall got their idea that the floats all have to be made of flowers.
And
Same thing.
the last day of the parade, they took the King Carnival, who was the big, he was just a paper mache this particular year. I think it's different every year, but it was a big paper mache King Carnival, and they take him down on the beach and they burn him. And then they set off probably the most spectacular fireworks display that I ever saw until the recent ones that we've had in the United States. We think they probably just finally learned how to give good fireworks displays from the French. At the time, and this was so many years ago, it was like nothing we had ever seen. And of course, they burned King Carnival, and that was sad. You wanted to cry. It was
It's
over
over.
with, all over with. While we lived in Nice, we were in the garden area.
Oops. In the area where they grew flowers commercially.
And Paul's friend particularly,
Oh, I thought it was Linda's.
no, this was Richard,
Oh, Richard.
Big Richard.
No. Oh, Big Richard. That's right. There were two Richards. Richard.
And Big Richard had his very own greenhouse, and he was growing tulips. And he decided that he was going to bring me a bunch of tulips. And I thought, oh, that was so nice. But he came with an armload of tulips, and I filled every container I had in the house. And next thing I know, here he came with another armload of tulips. And I filled everything that I could find, buckets and wastebaskets and everything else. I said, oh, Richard, this is so nice. And then here he'd come with another. Well, pretty soon we had the commode and the bathtub full of tulips. And I said, Richard, enough. There's no place to go. He says, I have more. He would take off cut the flowers because they were allowing the bulbs to divide and separate, which would make more for him. But that's what he did in his greenhouse, and he was just being nice. They would have thrown the flowers away normally.
That reminds me, they did the same thing up in the Low Countries. They pulled the blossoms off all the flowers there.
Yeah, when we were in Holland.
Lay for the car.
And that was in Belgium. It was a begonia lei. And they just, the lei was about, must have been 18 inches wide, and it fit across the whole front of the car. And so you just fastened that way, and you could tell who had been through the flower country because they had flower leis on their cars. Yeah.
No.
We had more picnics. This particular one was just on the river that was...
The Var.
Yeah.
The Var River. Oh, I know what that is. That's the farmer's strike.
When we left Nice, we took some tours back and sort of zigzagged back and forth across France. And in one part in the south of France, we ran into a farmer's strike, and they blockaded all of the roads. You couldn't hardly move any place. The traffic just wasn't moving. The farmers wouldn't let you through. In one town, there was a motorcyclist that was very helpful. He said he'd get us through the town. And so he drove through a service station and down the sidewalk, down the wrong way on a one-way street, but he got us out of the town, only to get out in the country where the roads were blocked anyway, so we still couldn't go anywhere.
And the tax in the car?
Huh?
They threw tax on the roads?
That was primarily in Algeria,
Yeah.
where they put the tax down to stop the traffic. I don't recall that they did that in
Like
France.
flat tires.
That's when we came out of Algeria.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's
We-
when you moved to Nice.
When we moved to Nice, we took the car to the dock and it was fine. But when it arrived in Marseille, it's where we took the car to. When the car arrived there, it had 4 flat tires and one side was bashed in. Don't know whether it happened on the boat or whether some of the Algerians decided to take it out on our car. But anyway, there was about 80 tacks in one tire when we went to have them fixed. And they said they're just not worth repairing, so we just threw all the tires away and bought new ones.
We should have known then that the Muslims were going to give us trouble. Because they ran us out of Algeria, I would just soon stayed there. But
Not me.
it
I
was
didn't like
untenable.
it there. Yeah. Okay. Now, back in Paris, however, which we sort of went in and out of, in
Tuileries.
Tuileries, there were several ponds, and the children were allowed to sail their little sailboats. And of course, Paul had to have a little boat that he could put out on one of those ponds. And generally, they were radio controlled. But I don't know how Paul didn't have a radio controlled one.
No,
so
he had a
you sail
sailboat.
them out and just when they get to the other side of the pond, I guess you run around the pond and collect them. But I don't even remember. But the Tuileries was a favorite haunt of ours. We used to spend a lot of time there.
It's just a park, and the Tuileries translated as a tile factory. And back in history, there was a tile factory there about the time they were building the palace.
This was a garden area. The gardens were beautiful there. But it's also the area now where they have put the glass pyramids in front of the
Oh, that's at the Louvre.
front of the Louvre. Well, the Tuileries are
Yeah, that's right. The other end is the Louvre.
and they ruined the whole area with all this modern stuff in period. At least in our impressionist thing.
I don't think we're alone.
I don't think so either. Another thing we did for entertainment was we went to the Bois, the woods, which was another park. But there were very few parks where you were allowed to walk on the grass. And but at the Bois, you could roam any place that you wanted to. It was just a woods, and I wouldn't really say there was grass there. It was just worn down, nothing. But we used to take our pétanque, which was a game of steel balls, sort of like the Italian
Yeah, bulls.
bowls.
Uh-huh.
But in France they called it pétanque, and we used to play. You have 2 steel balls that weigh a kilo apiece, and a little tiny wooden ball, and you throw your ball to see how close you can get your steel ball to the little wooden ball. And
We
whoever
still have that.
and we still have that set. Yeah, it's been well used. It doesn't shine like it did originally. When we traveled around, we traveled camping because it was impossible for us to try to go any place and all of us stay in hotels and eat in restaurants. And so our economy way of making ends meet and being able to do the maximum amount while we were living in Europe and see the maximum amount, we bought tents. We started out with 1 tent and soon decided that 4 of us in 1 tent didn't work so well, so we bought a second tent.
Yeah, but the first that we had fun. And remember, we went up to Cherbourg, I think it was, on the march.
Etretat. Yeah.
Etretat?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, right, Etretat. And we didn't know any better, and there was a slight slope where I set it up, and in the morning, you kids or somebody had slid out of the tent.
Yeah, you were both out of the tent. All you had inside the tent were your heads. Right out the door.
Yeah.
So we got a second tent, and that way the kids were in 1 tent and we were in another. But that really wasn't so good either because we sort of wanted a connection, and putting the 2 tents next to each other didn't really work very well. So we got what really amounted to a tarp-like that was just a flat piece that put between the two tents, and it made sort of a what of our kitchen living room
Yeah.
between the two bedrooms. Really first
It's
class.
a little tricky. You had to get the tents exactly the right distance apart. Oh yeah, that's in Italy though. That one.
Okay, this is in Italy, and this is there's a boar there
Florence.
in Florence whose nose has been rubbed by visitors so much that it's what kind of metal is that under there, do you suppose? It looks gold.
I don't know.
Is
Brass.
shining, brass
maybe.
probably is shining through. And the trick is you rub the boar's nose, and it was good luck. It means that you'll be able to return to Florence. But there were various things like that in other places. I seem to remember there was a nymph of some kind.
Yeah. There were 3 coins in the fountain too. The original.
We won't go into that because it's kind of dirty. So that we weren't just absolute tourists. We did have tourist books, and we did check off the 4-star sites, tried to see everything. But so that we would have a little different direction than what most people do, we each had an interest of sorts. Mine and Linda's and mine was artists, and Paul's and Dad's was music. And so we would look up artists or composers and check out their birthplaces or where they performed or something. And
In Norway, we went to where Grieg's house, and it had rained so much that my feet were muddy, and I wouldn't go in because it was bare floors. So I've been there, but I didn't go in. So that was Grieg.
well, we hit most of the opera houses too, or anything, just so that we could say that we'd been there. In 1960,
We made the big trip.
Linda planned a trip for us to Norway and Sweden, and so she did all the research on what we should see, and I think there was 2,000 waterfalls or something, at least that many, because she's definitely a very waterfall person. But we did do we did a loop up through Norway or through Sweden, and then crossed over to Norway. And I remember in Norway we were having the car service for the first time, and so I thought, I've just got to wash my hair, and I didn't have any shampoo, but I had laundry detergent, and so I shampooed my hair with Omo. I do not recommend this. My hair, I was like a Ubangi. It was.
Oh, we got
It was terrible, and I couldn't do anything with it at all. It just. Anyway, we got the car serviced.
We didn't have a car until just that time. Working for the company I did, well, I guess most French companies were generous, but CFPS was. If you worked south of the 15th parallel, you got extra money. And I did. I worked further south than that in the Sahara Desert. And if you worked in August, you got extra money because that was supposed to be a holiday. And anyway, this year I combined them all together, and I went down on the Champs-Élysées and went to the Renault dealer and bought a Dauphine and planked down the cash. No, I wrote a check, and it was an old franc, so it was 32 million. That was terrible trying to write a check that way, but I made it and they took it. And so then we had a car to take off. But we had to do that first, and it was only because of these peculiarities of extra pay for any little thing in France.
Before we had the car, we took public transportation, which we found to be excellent in Europe.
Didn't really need one, but
And
going on that trip we did.
well, we had done everything within 5 kilometers around that we could handle easily on the trains, and we would take a train out and know that there was, within 5 kilometers, there was another train that would take us back to Paris, and we would walk the 5 kilometers between. We did that a couple of times, but that that was not terribly satisfactory either. But once we had the car, then we decided we could really expand. And that's why we decided to take this trip to Norway and Sweden. But we made the trip rather quickly, and we had time left over, and here we were at the point of Denmark, and said, but the Olympics are on in Rome. If we drive like 60, we can get to the Olympics and get to Rome in time for the Olympics, and so we did.
Sure, I remember one other thing. Where were we? Copenhagen or someplace like that? You had a 1,000-kilometer checkup, just like you have a 1,000-mile checkup in here. And I was off there, and I'm pretty sure it was Copenhagen. Anyway, I stopped at the Dolphin dealer, and just as if I bought it there, it didn't cost me anything. I think it was there that I first saw that the Olympics were on. While I was waiting for the car, I was wandering around, and there was a television showing it. So I think after that, at least in my mind, that's where we were headed.
Well, we didn't have that much time left, and so we had to divide up the sites. Linda and I decided that we would do modern Rome, and we would save ancient Rome for the fellas. But while Linda and I were doing modern Rome, the boys went to the Olympics and saw
Wilma Rudolph won the sprint, women's sprint. Ralph Boston won the shot put. And in a relay, a four-man relay, the USA came in first, second, and third. And you can imagine how proud I was when I looked at the three flags up over the stadium, and they were all the U.S. flag. It was something. There's the only two participants I remember, though.
Then the four of us did ancient Rome. Oh, while Linda and I were out on our own, we got lost. And we kept going around in circles and following the signs to the supposedly where we were camped, but we kept going by the Spanish Steps. And so we'd take a little different turn and we'd go around. Next thing you knew, we were going past the Spanish Steps again. We got out on this ring road and totally confused, and there was a wonderful, beautiful little policeman there. And he spoke German and Italian, and we spoke English and French. So our communication was a little bit, not 100%. But at least he found out what our problem was and where we wanted to go. And so on this 4-lane highway, he stopped the traffic, let us make a U-turn, go the wrong way up a ramp that should have been down onto another road that went the other direction, and then we ended up in the right place. Now, I would like to see somebody do that in the US&A. Stop the traffic on a superhighway. Great. While we were in, we sort of skipped over Norway. While we were in Norway, as I said, Linda had, I know there were 2,000 waterfalls, and they all began to look alike, although there were some that were very special, and she had done her homework, so she really learned what were the interesting waterfalls that we had to see, the split ones and the ones with the most water and the highest drop and so forth and so on. Camping in Norway was an experience because it was raining most of the time, and one campground was really just a farmhouse that we stopped at. And she said yes, that we could camp there. There was nobody else there but us, but we could camp there. But she went out into the barn and she got some dry straw, spread it on the ground so that we could make our tents on dry land. So that I don't know. We said we had floors in our tents. It didn't matter, but she insisted that we put our tents on straw.
Yeah, it was kind of late when we got there, and I remember the next morning getting up and turning around as I went back to the highway. This beautiful fjord opened up in front of us, and it was just fantastic. We were halfway up one side.
Linda and Paul both wanted to go swimming in the fjords. And Linda was just learning how to swim, and she was swimming out and didn't realize that the water drops off so fast because it's just valleys that are filled with water. And she swam out too far, and she was going under for the third time when I went charging out there fully dressed and grabbed her by the back of her shirt and brought her in. Said, you have to swim parallel with the shore because otherwise you go out, you don't have to go out very far and you're way too deep. But that was very scary because I almost lost her. Among our other trips that we took,
This is
yeah,
when you went to Mallorca.
no, you went there first.
Yeah, we did. Linda and I decided we wanted to go skiing, and so we went to Austria skiing. It wasn't too bad, although we didn't do very well. I enjoyed the skating more than the skiing. I never did learn how to ski well. And Honey, at the same time, or a little later, decided that she didn't like our trip into the snow, so she and Paul went off and had a trip in the sun in Mallorca.
Except that you came back with beautiful sunburns from being in the snow where it was so nice and warm. And Paul and I were on the beach in Mallorca, and we darn near froze our tootsies. We laid on the beach, but we had to be covered with blankets because it was so cold. There were trips that we took, that Ross and I took alone. Usually the children were in scout camps or away. One trip was, we went to Austria and
Central Europe.
Central Europe. We did Germany and Austria and Czechoslovakia, and did manage to hit most of the beer gardens along the way. By this time, Ross had learned to drink beer. I had a couple of beers myself too. But one beer garden that we stopped at was the Hofbrauhaus in Munich, and that was where Hitler first organized his group, and he became first chancellor, and he started rousing his supporters at the Hofbrauhaus, and the area was still contaminated by him, and the meetings that he held were all upstairs in the Hofbrauhaus, and it was not open to the public. I understand it is open to the public now, but when we were there, they didn't allow anybody up there.
Yeah, we were only, 15, 20 years after the war?
Yeah, it was pretty close after the war, yeah.